Normandy, June 6, 1944. As the Western Allies began their amphibious landings along this 45-mile stretch of coastline, inland, thousands more men were already engaged in life-or-death battles to keep those coming ashore safe from enemy gunfire. Of all the many actions that day, one, immortalised on screen in the series Band of Brothers, has gone into airborne legend. This is the story of Easy Company's assault on Brecourt Manor. The men of Easy, more formally Company E 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, were part of that great D-Day invasion. Their job? To drop inland of Utah Beach and secure the main causeways for troops landing later that morning. But what on paper was straightforward was in practice far from simple. Taking off from RAF Apottery in Devon, England, in C-47 transport aircraft about 11 p.m. on the 5th of June, they crossed the channel by night, running a gauntlet of heavy flak which saw Easy Company commander's aircraft shot down with the loss of all on board, before the remaining sticks of paratroopers were deployed in the flooded and pitch-black area beyond Utah Beach. The drop was a nightmare. High winds, cloud, confusion, last-minute changes in direction, and miscalculation meant that those sticks of paratroopers instead were scattered far and wide, some miles from their intended drop zones. But despite the chaos, some men did reach their target areas and within hours of reaching French soil would be engaged in a brutal fight for incredibly high stakes. Let's meet a few. First Lieutenant Richard Winters. Born in Pennsylvania in 1918, Dick had joined the Army in August 1941 and volunteered to join the parachute infantry during his officer training. Highly regarded by all his men, he was a natural leader whose star would rise throughout the Second World War. Lieutenant Buck Compton. A California native with a love of sports, Buck had grown up in LA and in his pre-war days had appeared as an extra in several Hollywood films, once getting kicked off set after angering the film's star, Charlie Chaplin. By 1944, he was a respected platoon leader in Easy Company. Sgt Wild Bill Garnier. Born in Philadelphia to a large family of 10 children to Italian parents, Bill had joined the Citizens Military Training Camp before the war with hopes of becoming an officer in the US Army. But following the attack on Pearl Harbor and wanting to do his bit, he had instead enlisted, joining the 506 to undertake his training at Camp Toccoa, Georgia. By about 7 a.m. on the 6th of June, just a dozen men of Easy Company, including Winters, had reached here, the small hamlet of Le Grand Chemin, headquarters of Lieutenant Colonel Robert Strayer's 2nd Battalion 506. Strayer, along with all other paratroopers on the ground, was madly trying to gather his forces to take on targets of opportunity. As it turned out, there was one just a few fields away. Let's understand why. So, looking now at Utah Beach, we see the stretch of sand upon which the men of the 4th Infantry Division were due to land. Whilst beach defences here weren't particularly strong, the defenders did have a secret weapon: flooding. By breaching waterways and drainage systems beyond the beach, the Germans had created narrow channels up which any landing troops must pass in order to move further inland. The key one at Utah was right here, causeway number 2. Situated directly on the route 4ID would need to use to get moving off the beach, it was a classic concentration point, meaning that any artillery within range could fire directly on this area and be almost certain to hit something. And that was exactly what was happening. Although the Allies had anticipated artillery batteries situated behind the beaches, they simply couldn't find them all. Those that had been found by aerial reconnaissance had in many cases been targeted or neutralised before the landings. The problem, though, was the hidden guns that they hadn't yet located. By turning now to an aerial reconnaissance image taken on the morning of D-Day itself, overlaid onto the modern satellite image, we can understand the problem a little better. This is the area just north of Saint-Marie-du-Mont, a little under 3 miles from Utah's causeway number 2. Do you see an artillery battery here? No? Neither did Allied planners. In fact, by zooming into this patch of field, it's still basically impossible to spot an enemy position, and for good reason. By this stage of the war, Allied air power reigned supreme over much of Europe, and keeping an artillery battery in plain sight was just asking for it to be destroyed. And so, the Germans adapted, forming battery positions around existing fields with trenches dug into hedgerows, guns also concealed between trees, and supporting positions built in the surrounding field boundaries. Looking again at this same image, there's only one very slight clue that this isn't a normal field. It's here. These slightly lighter marks which showed that something, probably heavy and with wheels, was moved into this hedge line in these locations. It turns out that's exactly what happened, as arrayed here were 4 German 105mm light field howitzers, artillery pieces that were installed and by 7:30 AM on the 6th of June were firing on Utah's Causeway 2. Every round that hurled the 5,100 yards to the beach meant that more men on Utah would become casualties. By zooming out again, we can see that rather incredibly, just 280 yards away in Le Grand Chemin was the 2nd Battalion 506 newly established headquarters. With artillery fire clearly audible just a few fields away, Strayer needed to act, and quickly. A few minutes later, as an already tired Lieutenant Winters snatched a few moments' rest, he got the call that he was wanted up front. On arriving, he met the 2nd Battalion's operations officer, Captain Clarence Hester, who on indicating the area to his front simply said, "There's fire along that hedgerow there, take care of it." But take care of what exactly? We have an advantage today that Winters in 1944 did not, knowing the layout of the position to be attacked. For him, he was just advancing on gunfire to his front, but by consulting historical records, we learn that those 4 guns were placed exactly in these locations. We also know from Winters' own hand-drawn map shortly after the event, and from other records, that there was a single machine gun just here, and at least 2 more placed in these positions right here, facing across this field to defend the battery from the rear. Estimates vary, but it's likely that the position was manned by between 50 and 70 men. One small point here. There's long been a belief that the battery, as depicted in Band of Brothers, was in the open part of this field, with formal trenches linking gun pits. By looking at an aerial image taken on that day, this is clearly not the case. There was literally nothing in that field. So what makeshift trenches there were really adapted ditches running in the existing tree line. Here's Winters. While the non-commissioned officers prepared the men for the assault, I conducted a hasty reconnaissance of the enemy position. A leader gains an advantage in combat if he's able to appraise the terrain and the situation quickly and correctly. Crawling along a hedgerow, I moved into position where I could get a better view of the enemy position. The guns appeared to be set in a trench in a hedgerow covered by machine gun fire from across an open pasture. The battery was firing directly down Causeway No. 2 in the direction of Utah Beach. Anticipating that it would be too costly to conduct a frontal attack across an open field, I determined our chances of success would be greatly enhanced if we could hit the enemy on the flank and silence 1 gun at a time. Returning to Le Grand Chemin, Winters gathered who he had from his company, a total of just 11 men, including Buck Compton, Sergeants Lipton, Ranney, Malarkey and Garnier, Corporal Joe Toy and Privates Popeye Wynn and Gerald Lorraine. With all assembled, he issued his orders, placing his 2 machine guns in position to provide covering fire as the assault teams approached. Next, he sent Lipton and Ranney off in this direction to put down flanking fire, whilst the 2 main assault groups under Compton and himself advanced along these 2 hedge lines towards the battery. Within moments the fight was on, as both American and German machine guns burst into life in a short-range duel, added to by the crack of rifles as they sought targets in the tree lines. It was now that Winters, seeing the greatest danger lay with the closest German machine gun here, sent Compton with Sergeants Malarkey and Garnier crawling onto the flank of the enemy position with grenades in hand. Here's Winters again. Just as Compton was ready to hurl his grenades, I started across the field with the rest of the assault team so that we jumped into the position together as the grenades exploded. Simultaneously, we hurled additional grenades at the next position. In return, we received substantial small arms fire and grenades from the enemy. As we approached the first gun, Popeye Wynn was hit in the butt and fell down in the trench. At the same time, a Jerry potato masher sailed into the middle of our group. We spread out as rapidly as possible, but Corporal Joe Toy just flopped down and was unlucky enough to have the grenade fall between his legs as he lay face down. It went off as I was yelling to him, "Move, for Christ's sake, move!" He just bounced up and down from the concussion, but he was unhurt and ready to go. By now, a couple of the men had tossed grenades at the Germans, so we followed up with a mad rush. Arriving moments later, the 3 attackers burst into the gun pit, causing the crew to flee the position, with 3 men shot down as they crossed this open ground. The first gun had fallen. Knowing momentum was key, Winters looked on down the trench to where the second gun was located, only to find a pair of Germans setting up a machine gun directly in front of him. He squeezed off 2 shots and both men fell. The route to the second gun was open. Here's Winters again. Leaving 3 men at the first gun to maintain supporting fire, we then charged the next position with grenades and lots of yelling and firing. Within seconds, we had captured the second gun. Consolidating the position, the firefight with the machine guns across the pasture continued, but by now Winters' men were running perilously low on ammunition. Fortunately, 30 minutes later, and with men down to their last few rounds, PFC John Halls of A Company arrived and distributed more, with the situation further boosted minutes later as several machine guns from battalion headquarters came up in support. With fresh clips in, Winters again led the charge, this time on the third gun. More firing, more yelling and more sheer terror on both sides, and within seconds that too was in American hands, along with 6 German prisoners. That success though had come at a price, with 22-year-old John Halls losing his life in the attack. 3 guns down, 1 to go. It was now that Winters saw Captain Hester crawling towards his position, armed with blocks of TNT and incendiary grenades. They were quickly stuffed down the barrels of the captured howitzers and ignited, with the resulting damage completely disabling them. As well as bringing TNT, Captain Hester also brought news that Dog Company's Lieutenant Ronald Spears was on his way with a further 5 men to reinforce Easy Company. Whilst awaiting Spears' arrival, Winters had a chance to look around him, finding, amongst other things, a map showing every single German 105mm emplacement on the Cotentin Peninsula, which was quickly sent back to battalion. Almost 2 hours after the fight had started, those reinforcements arrived, as Winters recalled. Finally, Spears came forward with a contingent from Dog Company and led the assault on the final gun in the battery. Joining Spears was Sgt Bill Garnier, one of the most consistently brave men in Easy Company. Having just been informed that his brother had been killed in action in Italy, Wild Bill Garnier fought like a man possessed. In a savage attack, Spears captured the gun and promptly disabled it. In the process, he lost Rusty Houch, who was killed when he raised his head to throw a grenade into the gun position, and Leonard G. Hicks, who was wounded. With the entire battery now destroyed, we withdrew because the machine gun fire that we were receiving from the manor house and other positions remained intense. The assault on Brecourt Manor was over. All told, the assault had been incredibly successful, with a hugely outnumbered assault party neutralising a battery of guns that was hammering troops coming ashore on Utah, saving countless lives in the process. For his part in leading the attack, Lieutenant Dick Winters was recommended for the Medal of Honor, but was ultimately presented with the Distinguished Service Cross by General Omar Bradley in its place. Buck Compton, Bill Garnier and Gerald Lorraine each received the Silver Star for their courage in action, and Toy, Lipton, Malarkey, Liebgott, Hendricks, Plesher, Petty and Wynne all earned the Bronze Star, making the assault on Brecourt Manor one of the most decorated actions of World War II. Of course, the war would go on, and for the men of Easy Company there were many more bitter fights to come, but that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out our other documentaries following the men of Easy Company right here on YouTube. And if you enjoy World War II generally, then be sure to check out our podcast, World War II Both Sides of the Wire, where each week our hosts, Professor Matthias Strone and Jesse Alexander, explore the conflict from both the Allied and Axis perspectives. That's all this time. We'll see you again soon.